So the way that we will do this panel is that I'd like to give all of our panelists an opportunity to give initial remarks. And I guess we'll start with the person closest to me. And then after that, I hope to engage in a conversation with our wonderful panelists. And I have some questions for all of you connected to your specific works, and then more broader questions. And then we'll open up, we'll allow the audience also to ask questions and maybe share some of your thoughts about their works. So Zia, we'll have Zia go first.
Thank you for coming, and delighted to be invited. You asked the person who expressly said he wasn't sure he had very much to offer by way of introductory remarks. I think I'm going to be more responsive than anything else. I might find myself expressing the view that, well, let's see. But thank you all for coming.
Yes, go ahead, Jordan. Okay. This is Jordan Allen.
Hi there. So originally I wanted to first address this, that I am not Tariq Toure, who is the original person who is going to be on this panel. Unfortunately, they are not able to be here today, and they informed us this morning, so I'm subbing in, which makes this an all Bengali panel, I believe.
Yes.
So, hooray! Yeah, Bangladeshi specific, actually. I just wanted to open also with a thank you for being here and for inviting me here, and also just to mention a little bit more about something in my introduction. I am working on my first novel, and it's really exciting. I went to Bangladesh for the last 8 months to do research on a period in Bangladesh's history in the late 80s and early 90s, and I'm constructing a story kind of tied a lot with the themes that the last panel discussed about memory, interlayering of sort of creative forces, these kind of themes. So I might get to talk about that today.
And this is Sharbari Ahmed.
Hi, thank you all for coming. This is exciting. I didn't expect an all Bangladeshi panel, which is so unusual. It's amazing. Well, I was just going to plagiarize myself and read from an article that I wrote a while ago for Kitab, but it feels really relevant. I was thinking about the word exotification really stood out for me, because I've been writing for a long time. And when I first started, I was at NYU, and that's where I was in the graduate creative writing program, and that's where I got my first taste of otherness in the workshops. There was only 3 South Asians in the creative writing program. I'm sure it's very, very different now. I'm not going to give you the dates because I don't want you to know my age. But
that's the only thing we are interested in.
Yeah.
Not me, no, lots of people always interested.
Yeah, I'm oldish. Anyway, but it was, I really felt it then. So I'm just going to recount an anecdotal situation. When I was at NYU getting my MA in creative writing, I handed in a story set in present-day Bangladesh about a young woman who was trying hard to please her mother-in-law and in the process accidentally burns down the ancestral mansion. The story was well received. However, the feedback suggested that I further exploit my rich Bangladeshi heritage. Meanwhile, I've never lived there, mind you. But to do so for pedestrian details and turmeric-tinged Indo-exotica that made it enticing to the Western sensibility. Essentially, they wanted less character study and more arranged marriages, saris fluttering gently in the wind, or elaborate cooking scenes involving cumin. I am still baffled by the enthusiasm of my fellow classmates for this particular story, and not for others, most of which eventually saw print. My instincts were that they could not reconcile my brownness with the non-brown characters I sometimes wanted to explore. In the end, I did not add more cultural touches, and the story still got published. When I was starting out, agents and editors were disappointed and unwilling to accept the fact that I was not exotic in my style or interested in the displaced immigrant theme. One actually said to me, "Can you write more about being Bangladeshi and American at the same time?" The problem was, I was not culturally conflicted enough. My Bangladeshi and American identities were not constantly at odds. That feeling of being an other happened more powerfully after 9/11, when being Muslim and American were deemed mutually exclusive. But I was not conflicted by it. I knew who I was. It was George W. Bush and the Department of Homeland Security who were not so sure. So I could go on, but that should give you an idea of what I've been dealing with. Some other things that happened to me is agents would say to me, this is the time when Jhumpa Lahiri took everything by storm. So what happened to me was, could you write more like Jhumpa Lahiri? And I said no. And so it took me a really long time to finally establish myself. And so that is a minefield that we as minority writers are constantly traversing. It's still happening. I guess we're going to unpack it in this panel.
Excellent. Well, let's start soft, right? So I want to know what inspires all of you as writers. What has inspired you to become writers, to engage in writing creatively, and to give that writing to the world?
I'm holding the mic, so I feel like personally I don't have a memory of when I wasn't writing. I have these, I don't know, maybe my generation knows these like blank books that were hardbacks and you just color in them and you write stories in them, called bear books. I have a ton of those from when I was in elementary school and whatnot. And I feel like, unlike a lot of my peers, I was always journaling through fiction. So I was never doing like literally what was happening in my life, but a fantastical interpretation of it. And so I feel like that the inspiration comes from kind of interpreting the world around me and having a way to process that.
I've been writing for many years as well. I've been writing since I can remember, and I really had no thought, no particular urge to share with the world. It's not, I don't have I never had a desire to publish, and this book came into publication almost by accident as a story. But, I sent a writer friend asked me what I was doing with my time. I was in New York. A friend of mine had lost a child, a baby. I was in New York trying to be a support to this couple. There's not much you can do. This was in the last month. The child died the day Barack Obama was elected president of the United States for the first time. And I with time on my hands, I set about work on something that I'm always writing. And a writer I met said, what are you doing with your time? And I said, well, I'm tinkering with something. He expressed curiosity. That curiosity became insufferable. And just to shut him up, I sent him a chapter, and then at 6:30 in the morning the following day, the people who are now my agents started calling. So I'm very ambivalent about publication, but that's nothing to do with the reception of a non-mainstream author. It's nothing to do with any of the issues that we might touch upon. And I've been doing it for 20 odd years for mental health reasons. I need a place of beauty and honesty, and had various other jobs, and all of those jobs involved wearing a mask of some kind. Because they all involve promotion in some sense. And I needed a space where I could take off my masks. And so because of that, I have a habit that a habit in which I'm not conscious of the reader. I'm not conscious of readers wanting a certain kind of thing. I have no, so I can sit down and lose myself. Still, as it happens. So yeah.
kind of look at the writing thing that I do as a compulsion. It's like a disease I have to manage. I always knew I wanted to be a writer, and since I was 8 years old. So it's the same. It's publication is almost secondary to the urge to write. But then I decided I wanted to make a living doing it. And that was a scary time, because that seemed like an insurmountable, I mean, it seemed impossible. Very few people can make a living from their writing. But I thought I'll give it a shot. And so now I'm writing for television. And I'm writing, and that's how I'm supporting myself. But I'm primarily a fiction writer. And that I probably won't, if I just pursued that, I probably would not be able to support myself. So, but at least I'm doing what I love. I'm doing it for someone else. I'm creating someone else's vision. So that's also strange as a writer. Everything I write in my 9-to-5 job is basically, as one of my fellow writers in Quantico said, you're carrying the showrunner's water. And that's what I'm doing. So, but this is what I've always wanted to do. Everything that Zia and Jordan are saying are exactly, resonate with me. I think every writer who has pursued this to the hilt would have some, similar sentiments. But for me, I can't imagine doing anything else. I don't think I would be happy.
I really liked what you said, Zia, about a place to take off your masks. And I think considering the theme of today's symposium about thinking about home, and then our panel is on the present, for all of you, where presently is home? In the imagination, in your writing, in your private writing, in your public writing, what is home?
I feel like this is a really complicated question, so I needed a moment to kind of hold on to that, because in a literal physical sense, I've been in transit for the last year and a half. I've been traveling, I've been trying to figure out what a sense of home means. Not necessarily for the purpose of like just self-exploration, but in the sense that, unlike Sharbari's excerpt about feeling sort of grounded in themselves, I think that for me there was a little bit more friction. I'm adopted. I figured out a lot of my cultural heritage late. One of the pieces that I've recently written was a memoir piece about being an adopted woman but having ties to a family elsewhere, and like meeting them later in life, meeting them and kind of reconciling all of that. So then what do you mean when you say home, when you say family, when you say all of these different, supposedly easy markers? I think, so I'm almost not offering an answer to your question, but I'm offering the answer of, through all of this exploration, I think I've found that a lot of what home means to me is questioning and evaluating within myself.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I don't know. I don't know what home. I know that I envy people who have a strong sense of home, but or are capable of expressing with joy expressing the pleasure of going home. But I didn't have that. The novel, in 2007 I quit my job at the time and I went travelling across Europe and Asia. And I got as far as Syria. Syria was very different in those days. When I was in Syria in 2008 when I interrupted that journey because of friends who lost a baby. And that journey was about giving myself some space to think about home, actually. And I interviewed people along the way. I realized I wanted to talk to people and talked to people who lived on borders in some way or other. And I interviewed all sorts of interesting people. I interviewed a Greek old man in Istanbul who the Greeks had been herded out of Turkey earlier in the 20th century, and he knew I was coming to talk to him, and I had an interpreter with me, but it turned out that he had taught himself English, and he proceeded to read from 6 pages of closely written script, and the first thing he said was, "This is to record the sufferings of the minorities in Turkey in the 20th century." And I met a Saudi gypsy, Roma gypsy, or rather his father was a Saudi gypsy and his mother was a Bulgarian gypsy. And we talked for ages, and at the end, I let him talk, at the end I asked him, "Look, where is my home?" And I was curious I asked lots of people this, and I asked him, "Where is my home?" And he said, "Go to Bangladesh, take a photograph of someone there, look at it. Of course, Bangladesh is your home, now drink some tea." For him it was very matter of fact. And, there were, but everybody had their own take on where home was, but also on what home was. And I think part of the search for home is a search for a definition. So for me, most of my life has been spent in my head in some way or other. I'm a reader, and I like ideas, and I like to make sense of things, which is of course a doomed activity. But there's a certain pleasure in trying, and in the trying, I think I find peace of some kind, momentary, but it might be enough to, if I can sustain it until I die, it might be a good way to go out.
I guess the search for home has informed most of my writing. Now that I think about it, hearing Zia and Jordan talk about it. From age 7 onwards, I was always the new kid in school because my dad became a UN diplomat. We moved, the first place I lived was in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, for the first age 7 to 12, which are very formative years. And I think it left it sort of an indelible stamp on me, being in one of the few African countries that was never colonized. So, and learning a great deal about, all the Abrahamic traditional religions, all the Abrahamic religions can be traced to Ethiopia to a certain degree. And I didn't know that. I didn't know that Judaism was founded in Ethiopia. That's, people don't really think about that. So that made an impact on me, and it informed a play I wrote called Raisins Not Virgins later, which was about sort of a young Muslim American woman's search for her own personal jihad in the truest sense of the word, which is a spiritual journey, right? And so I guess I didn't think about home very much because I never was in one place for very long. And ultimately, when I became a mother, I realized home was wherever my child was. And then he's going to go to college, so my home will be at some college that I'm paying for.
So now I want to ask specific questions related to your work. And the mic will go this way, because the first part I have is actually related to something that Zia includes in as the opening to your novel, In the Light of What We Know. You quote Edward Said, who is the late Professor Edward Said, who is a very important
Oh, that's me.
Is not only very important to post-colonial studies, but very important to the life of this campus. So you quote him on what he says about exile. And I'm just going to read a selection from that. This is from the quote that you included in your novel. Exile is the unhealable rift forced between a human being and a native place, between the self and its true home. Its essential sadness can never be surmounted. And I want you to perhaps speak to why this spoke to you. Edward Said's work in terms of what he's written about exile has now been subject to many readings and also critiques. In this campus in particular, we've spoken about multiple levels of exile and how even exile can become an elitist discourse, right? The intellectual exile is very different than the exile of a refugee. So perhaps you can speak to why you included that.
Yeah, it can be elitist as the narrator tries to find a source for something that Zafar says, and he can't because I couldn't. I actually came up with the sentence and I thought, someone must have said this. And I went hunting for it and nobody had. And it was an exile as a refugee with a library. And so the narrator tries to find the source, but there isn't. It was, and it is, right? The exile is the noble refugee. So I think exile speaks to everyone, people inside this room and others outside, because we all, in some form, feel exile. The language of religion often includes the language of exile, of distance from God and returning to God. And you know, in the Old Testament, the first formative, that's not the first, but a formative experience for mankind was exile, banishment from Eden. And so, and in a sense, that is the story of humanity, certainly in the Abrahamic tradition. It's the story of our slow return to Eden. So, it speaks at a very profound level to every human being. And I think possibly for very prosaic reasons, we are capable of quite astonishing reflection. And pretty much everyone, I know this not because I've done a poll, but because our language is suffused with it, our art, our culture, our everything is replete with the idea of alienation in some form, exile in some form. Pretty much everyone feels that something's missing. Something's not quite right. Something is, everybody feels a shortfall. And the experience of the geographic exile operates as a metaphor for that, right? As well as being in itself something of interest. And I say that because I'm interested in connections, always. And also because I'm a Colombian, what can I say about exile that hasn't been said in these halls many, many times already? Yeah. Sorry, you were asking me, that's right.
Yeah.
I'm happy to get
I'm happy if anybody would like to respond to that. I think you're right, Zia, that we have the language of exile embedded in even different religious discourses, including like the story, both mythical and literal story of the Hijra, right? Of the birth of a community based on being exiled, right, from their home.
And then
returning, right? And then there's a return. I wanted to ask Jordan about, at the end of your short story, Sonali Exchange, you return to a chest, right? Or not you, sorry. The character returns to a chest that is sent to her. I mean, there's a number of boxes that her mother sends before her mother leaves, before the character's mother leaves the country, right? At the very end of that story, It reads, piles of gold jewelry spilled out from the top and across her bedspread. Rings and bangles and glittering green and fiery orange, dangling beaded earrings that flashed in the light. They begged to be released from the wooden prison. The chest was endless. Farhana laid each piece on the bedspread, smoothing them out with her fingers, and imagined her mother standing at the airport waiting to board. I wanted to ask you about these objects, right, as signs of the past that emerge in our present. And in that particular story, the objects are really important, right? The objects of the mother particularly. And I want to hear from you how that operates in your work, right? These objects of the past, presumably from where her mother comes from.
Thank you for that question. Again, you're asking really deep, difficult questions, so it's taking me a moment. But I think that for me, I guess objects and I'm thinking of like objects throughout my pieces, because that one actually is like a few years back by now, and I'm thinking like about how the things that we carry with us or that we find important to take hold of. For instance, you have limited space in a suitcase and you're trying to take care of the things that are most important to you. I feel like really emphasize the characterization of that particular person. Obviously, we can draw parallels with life about the things that we hold on our person every day, or things that we kind of are okay with discarding. Some of us are more prone to like holding on to things, and others are more okay with the spring cleaning and the getting rid of and the purging kind of attitude. I think there's a line that I wrote about the split between the city and the suburb being similar to the split between continents, like a continental divide. And so it's an interesting space of like that object also travels not only across that border, but also across the border in time. And so I think that holding on, although I haven't fully explored this in my work, I think that is something that really interests me, of like how and what do we hold on to characterize our own stories.
So, Sharbari, I want to ask you a question about Quantico.
Okay.
So I have to tell you that when I teach, if I'm teaching Islamic Civ, I'll ask the students to name a fictional Muslim character. And in the past, even on this campus, the most popular character has been Jasmine from Aladdin. Most recently, though, I've asked this question again, and this was not on this campus. This was in North Carolina in a very small liberal arts school. And the students mentioned Yasmin al-Masri's character, right? Nima and Reyna from Quantico. And I have to say that there's another question that I asked the students on mentioning, for them to mention any Muslim woman that they can think of. Any Muslim woman, right? Fictional, non-fictional, right? And usually it's a character that's related to national security, right? And you mentioned earlier on that it's a strange place to be to write for someone else's vision. And I want you to maybe speak to that, because when I first engaged with Quantico, I was a little bit skeptical because of the conversations I've had with my students, especially if they're familiar with Bollywood. The Muslim characters they know from Bollywood are also characters mired in a sort of national security narrative with India, so like the Muslim terrorist. And I was wondering if there was going to be a marriage of the Indian national security narrative and the American national security narrative, considering that Priyanka Chopra is the main figure in Quantico. You don't have to spoil anything, but I want to hear maybe what it means to write for someone else's vision, and how have you been able to maybe, is there a way to maybe poke at it or shape it with your own voice?
Well, part of the reason I was hired by ABC and Josh Safran, who's the showrunner of Quantico, the creator, is to poke holes and to be that sort of sounding board. Initially I was hired because I was South Asian, and they didn't realize I was Muslim. They didn't really think about it. But the other writer on staff is she's no longer going to be there. But for this first season was Shireen Davis, who is a Palestinian American filmmaker. But she's Christian, but she's Arab. So they were thinking, you know, that she would be part of shaping Nima and Reina Amin, who are Lebanese. When they realized I was Muslim, they were like, "Oh, that's great. That's like a twofer. She's South Asian and she's Muslim."
She knows everything.
So yeah, I mean, that's what I'm there for. I'm there as a sounding board. But they don't. The beauty of this team and Josh and everything, Quantico team, is they don't look at me as the brown Muslim writer. They just treat me like one of the writers. I was a little worried about that. I realized that in the final analysis, token is not the word. I'm not a token. I wasn't a token. I was a representative, and that to me, I don't want to represent all Muslims for ABC. That's insane. And so I was worried about that, but they very quickly stopped looking at me like that, because when you're in a room with 8 other writers, crazy writers, because writers are crazy, TV writers, 11 hours a day, color, race, religion, gender, it all falls to the wayside. We're one team trying to create a TV show, and that's what takes precedence, you know. So yeah, I mean, I do the best I can. Like, you know, sometimes, I don't know how many of you watch Quantico, but episode 15, which aired recently, was written by Cameron Litvak, who's the co-executive producer, and Logan Slapter, one of the writers. They're both Jewish. They wrote one of the most powerful, I felt, Cam did, one of the most powerful scenes in which the Nima, or the Reina, I don't know which one it was.
Nima.
Was it Nima? No, it's the hijabi, Reina. Reina, even I get them confused. Reina is telling a young African-American man who has joined a sort of ISIS-like group that what he's doing is completely un-Islamic, that he's not going to get the opportunity to do his shahada that way, that he's going about being Muslim entirely incorrectly. And that was written by 2 Jewish boys. And they took their time, they did their research, they were careful, and they wanted to make sure that that message, even in the, whatever the 7 or 8 seconds or 10 seconds that was powerful. And I would like to think that, and of course they did it, and they were like, "Sharp, what do you think?" You know, and I was like, I'm getting goosebumps. It's fantastic. I thought it was great. It was so important. And the thing is, the majority of Americans they're not thinking, "Oh, 2 Jews wrote this," but this is important. And that's why Josh has put together this team. He thought about it carefully. He's trying to make a point. We are hamstrung by corporate interests. It's network. It's not cable. So we have to be careful. But this is how we're doing it. You know, it's small. It seems small, but you know, 20 million people watch us. I mean, worldwide, I don't even know how many. So let's see, maybe, you know, bit by bit.
It doesn't seem, so what if you're a token, and even if you were, in a sense, here's the problem. Otherwise, if they didn't hire anyone with a Muslim background or a South Asian background, then they run the risk of not having any Muslim or South Asian influence other than the researched influence. And so, yeah, I mean, it's not there's a way of looking at it that's quite generous perhaps, or charitable perhaps, but also plausibly right. You know, it's, I had a call in February from someone hiring writers for a new show in Hollywood, or whatever, yeah, in LA rather, and they wanted me because I'm, you know, there's a character who's British, and I thought, just hire me because I'm British. certain kind of nuance that I have access to that even the best American writers might not be able to access. I mean, you see, this is the golden age of television, by the way. We really are living in the age when there's fantastic TV, absolutely stunningly good quality TV. And you can see there are fantastic writers writing for these shows. And they don't shy away from writing stuff that not everybody has access to. But they are trusting people to have enough intelligence to be able to appreciate the richness. You need a certain amount of intelligence, even if you don't get it. You need a certain amount of intelligence in order to be enriched by this detail, not all of which you have access to. And sorry, that was to illustrate it. Yeah, not token. Yeah. Oh, and I couldn't do it because at the end of the call they said, well, can you fax over your a copy of your green card? Oh, email. Yeah, I could do it. Yeah, so.
Because of your immigration status?
Yeah, my immigration status. Yeah.
Welcome to America.
No, that's fine. I mean, I'm not. But I should fix that question.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask, I think we're almost at the time where the audience will be invited to ask questions, but the final question I want to ask all of you is, since we have the luxury of being the Bangladeshi panel, I'm really excited about this. And in some ways, all of you, either in your bios or most recently, Zia, you wrote an NYT op-ed of So I'm Bangladeshi Now. And we were just talking before this panel about ways in which the Bangladeshi part of hyphenated identities within this matrix of ethnic and racial politics in the United States gets made invisible. And I want to hear from you how you feel about that, how it emerges maybe in your writings, the textures of this very specific historical and rich experience, right?
I don't know if it's just one other source of, just one other thing that informs who I am. The piece in the New York Times wasn't about, it was interesting, apparently the Dhaka elite described me as a rich British brat. That I should be proud to be Bangladeshi, because that's a complete misreading of the piece, and unsurprising that the Dhaka elites would take that, adopt that reading. Really, they never miss an opportunity to get it wrong. Because the piece is not about how I identify. In fact, there's a line in the piece that says the issue is not what I choose to call myself, but how you, the white Briton, what you choose to call me. Because I'm exploring the assumptions embedded in the white European side about what it is to be authentically whatever, Dutch, English, yeah. So no, I don't, I mean, it's just one other, and I lived there as a child. First of all, we left when I was a baby, and then we went back briefly for a few years. But I was in the ground, I was in the village. I don't know Dhaka really. I worked in Dhaka later. I was an anti-corruption activist in Dhaka. So I was a director of Transparency International there. And I have that experience but it was an experience of being an alien, really. I mean, people didn't know how to deal with me. The question, who are your parents, never had any satisfactory answer because they, it meant nothing to them. I'm talking about the Dhaka sort of, and it's also very uncomfortable because someone like me would not have any authority to say anything in Bangladesh. Someone of my background you know, I was a beneficiary of a school system that was capable of, you know, not even a school system. You know, I grew up in a place which had excellent public libraries, and I went to great university. You know, but if you had talent as a child in Bangladesh and you're poor, which I was, but not in Bangladesh, then there's no opportunity, right? So I'm a slightly uncomfortable making figure as well for elites. You know, it's and the reason I mention this is that, you know, it's a complex heritage. I cannot say I don't feel a kinship with elites anywhere and in Bangladesh, and so when they try to appropriate me, so now then the book does extremely well, and then I go to Bangladesh, and they're, you know, they're trying to adopt me, and I'm thinking, well, I have nothing in common with you. I give a talk at Dhaka University in which I ridicule the elites, because I'm like that. I'm generally a prickly person. If you ask me for an opinion, I will give it. So I have an ambivalent relationship to. I have a very much stronger kinship with the poor. I feel a bond with people who have little and who have few opportunities. So that is where my heart is. And I don't say that it's not nobility. This is not a choice. This is simply an enduring effect of my own childhood. So it's not a, yeah.
Thank you.
As I was thinking, and also as we were listening to you, I was thinking about how for me it's also this kind of matrix of different points, at which one is closer or further away from, Bangladeshiness, right? Because I think for me, and I already said that I was adopted, but also just this feeling, so I'll go back. Post 9/11, I was in elementary school, honestly. And my dad said to me not to tell anyone.
So you know how young she is.
Yeah, I'm giving away my age.
I wasn't even born.
No, but right away, my dad was saying, don't tell them you're Muslim, and you can just sort of hide behind a certain Deshi identity in that sense of trying to keep safe, right? And of course that then made me question, why would I hide this part of my, he didn't give explanation, and now at this point he's like, assimilation doesn't really help us keep safe in any way. But back then he was a lot more about that. So I started exploring not only a Muslim identity, but a Bengali identity and what that particularly meant for Bangladesh, right? In middle school, without a lot of context, in a sea of white faces in Seattle, which is where I grew up. So, a very different experience. And wanting to have this over-the-top pride or attachment to that national identity, which at this point I think was just me trying to have something in response to the experience of living in this country when your identity was so visibly politicized, right? And one of my friends said to me, race issues are color-coded, and that's why we can see them. It's not that, no one would come up to me being like, oh, you're the queer writer, or you're the woman, you could say woman writer, but the color coding of my skin brings that to the fore, right? So I guess I feel like that's one end of this matrix of okay, I really wanted to be identified with something culturally so that I could feel safe and secure in that. And then I would also say that, on the other hand, exploring and actually getting into the history and context through writing, through research, through traveling, through trying to speak Bangla, poorly and in a second language kind of way. All of that to say that we are inherently different, and it took a process actually of claiming that for me, I would say. To claim like Bangladeshi American as one label, united, rather than just Bangladeshi parts covering up something else.
I think I'm in a similar, I completely understand what Zia is talking about. When I go back to Dhaka, I'm in a similar position that he's in. I mean, you know, I've never lived in Bangladesh. I left when I was 3 weeks old. I've been back a few times, and I have very, very close friends. And of course my parents are there and stuff. When I go to Bangladesh, I go as a tourist who understands the customs. But still, the rules sometimes I don't get them. The social rules. It's a very, you know, because with being Bangladeshi, it's a class thing, isn't it? And America is not the great leveler, by the way. The Bangladeshi elite class come here, they're elite here. It's, you know, it's simply because they have the money, you know. And so when I go back, my father. Okay, let me talk a little bit about class, because that's what Bangladesh is all about. My father comes from a very humble background. He was born in Sylhet, in the Gram, on a dirt floor. My mother is from Chittagong, which those of you who are in Bangladesh, you don't understand. Chittagonians and Sylhetis, they don't marry or have sex. But this couple did, and boom, I'm here. Because they did not have an arranged marriage, they dated. Can you believe that? And my mother had 3 kids already when she met my dad. So my parents are completely different, obviously. But he comes from a humble background. She comes from an upper middle class background. And the only reason they were able to get together is because my father was very exceptionally bright, and he went to, you know, American schools, and he got his doctorate and his postdoctorate at Princeton and his doctorate, I forget where. He's got a lot of degrees. And then he met my mother, and they dated, and so on. Had my father not been able to get those opportunities, things would have been very different. You know, so for me, Bangladesh is about my parents' history. It's about where they dated. It's about that for me. It's when I go there, I don't feel like I'm at home, but I don't feel like an alien either. But then suddenly something will happen at a party, and I will be made to feel like an outsider immediately. And they'll treat me like their own. And again, it's the elite that I'm mixing with, you know. So because that's just the way it's going to be, right? You know, just given where my parents live and given what I do and so on. And then they'll make me feel welcome, and I'll be speaking Bangla, and it'll be all great, and eating with my hands and all that. And then suddenly I'll say something, maybe slightly critical, maybe drawing a little bit of attention to the way the servants are being treated. And boom, I'm out. I'm out. So I know that I'm walking in a very precarious line of being sort of a welcome, but also being treated like I'm an imposter. So Bangladesh for me is what my parents have given me, what my family, my ancestors have given me. Not now. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. I wanted to add on to your comment because
I've never thought about that until Zia started talking about it. I read Zia. First of all, I've known Zia for many, many years, and I'm very, very proud of him. And I read your article, and I didn't understand the reaction. I didn't get it. Some of these people are my friends, and I didn't get it. But I didn't want to say anything because I don't want to get into it on Facebook. You know what I mean? Because I get in a lot of trouble on Facebook. ABC thinks I'm a loose cannon. So I have to keep quiet. But I was like, what? I sent a private message to someone saying, I think you're misunderstanding what Zia's talking about. He's not talking about us. He's talking about the way white people view him. It's not, and we've all been there. So what are you guys going on about? It's that, you know, so when he was talking about that, all these images and anecdotal things came up for me about Bangladesh.
Well, thank you. I'll share about my Bangladeshi thoughts later after the panel because it's not about me. But I will want to have this conversation with you guys after. But I would like to now open the discussion and include all of you. So if anybody has any questions, please raise your hand.